It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. My heart raced with excitement, my hands trembling as I held my bouquet. I couldn't believe I was marrying the man of my dreams, the one who made me feel seen and loved in a way that no one ever had. Today, I was stepping into a new chapter, a fresh start. But standing at the altar, with the eyes of everyone I had ever known upon me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whispers behind me, the subtle glances from my parents, and the judgment in their eyes, they were all too clear. "Look at her," my sister muttered under her breath, loud enough for me to hear. "She's marrying that pathetic, poor man." I froze. My heart sank into my stomach. I had hoped that today would be different, that they would put aside their opinions and support me. But their words cut deeper than I expected. I tried to look away, to focus on my fiancé, but the weight of their disapproval hung heavy in the air. "Isn't it just sad?" my mother added, her voice dripping with disdain. I thought she'd have better taste than this. And then they laughed. A cold, mocking laugh that echoed in the quiet church, making me feel like the smallest person in the room. My cheeks burned with humiliation, but I didn't let it show. I held my head high, gripping my bouquet tighter. I had made the decision to marry him months ago. Despite my family's judgment, I knew deep down that he was the one for me. But now, hearing the cruel words they were throwing at me, it was as if the weight of their disapproval threatened to crush me. Just as I was about to turn to my fiancé, to find solace in the man I had chosen, something unexpected happened. The door to the church swung open, and in walked a figure that I didn't immediately recognize, but he carried himself with such confidence, such power, that everyone in the room turned to look. It wasn't until he approached the altar that I realized who he was. My heart skipped a beat as the man I had married stood beside me, not the poor man my family thought him to be, but a billionaire. The very same billionaire who had quietly worked behind the scenes to create the company that had made him one of the most influential people in the world. His presence commanded the room in an instant. The whispers and laughter that had filled the air came to an abrupt halt. I could feel the weight of their shock, their surprise. No one had expected this. No one had known that the man I had chosen to spend my life with was not just a humble man with a love for life, but someone whose name was synonymous with success, wealth, and power. As the priest continued with the ceremony, I could feel my family's eyes on us. The disbelief on their faces was palpable. But it wasn't just disbelief, it was regret, and it was written all over their faces. They hadn't just mocked me, they had mocked him, too. And they hadn't known who he was. When the vows were exchanged, my husband, no, my billionaire husband, took my hand, and there was an unspoken promise in his eyes. He was kind and humble in a way that didn't match his public persona. He didn't care about showing off his wealth. He didn't need to. But today, he was going to show my family exactly what it meant to judge someone based on what they thought they knew. The reception hall was buzzing, but it wasn't the usual cheerful chatter one might expect at a wedding. There was an undeniable shift in the air, a tension that seemed to hang over the entire room. My heart raced in my chest, not out of excitement or happiness, but because I could feel every eye in the room on us. Every whisper, every glance sent my way felt like a knife to my heart. The harsh words my family had said earlier were still echoing in my mind. "You're marrying a pathetic, poor man." My sister's mocking tone, my mother's sneering face. I couldn't shake it off. The humiliation was so sharp that it almost overshadowed the joy of this new chapter in my life. But then I remembered, no matter what they thought, I was here with the man I loved. The man who was going to stand by me, no matter how many people tried to tear us apart. As we walked into the reception hall, I could feel their stares. It was as if they were waiting for a cue, waiting for something to happen. I could see the confusion on my parents' faces, though they tried to mask it with forced smiles. They hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected him. They hadn't known the man standing beside me was not just an ordinary man, not someone they could easily dismiss. And for the first time, I felt a sense of power rising within me. It was a quiet strength, the kind that came from standing beside someone who truly saw you, who loved you for everything you were, flaws and all. We took our seats at the head table. I noticed how my family had subtly shifted in their seats, as if they weren't quite sure where to place their eyes anymore. My father, who had been the most vocal critic, now seemed to be grasping for words that didn't come easily. He didn't know how to handle this, how to handle him. But my husband, the man I married, didn't flinch. He wasn't intimidated by the discomfort in the room. He was calm, collected, and confident, not in an arrogant way, but in a way that made it clear he didn't need anyone's approval. Not mine, and certainly not my family's. The room was still for the most part. It felt as if time was suspended, just long enough for my parents to realize what had happened. And then, as if a veil had been lifted, my father stood up. The quiet murmur of the crowd died down instantly. It wasn't an announcement or a toast, at least not at first. No, it was a gesture, one that spoke volumes without saying a word. "I'd like to offer my congratulations to the bride and groom," my father said, his voice a little shaky, but not entirely devoid of sincerity. He cleared his throat, glancing around the room before his eyes settled on me. I've always been a man of pride. I believed in certain values. But I'll be the first to admit that I may have been wrong about this. His voice faltered slightly, but he steadied himself. About her choices. And about him. My breath caught. For a brief moment, I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My father, the man who had looked down on my decisions, who had made it clear that he thought I was making a mistake, he was admitting that he had misjudged us. There was a subtle shift in the room, too. People were staring at him in surprise, perhaps even expecting him to take back his words. But he didn't. He didn't apologize outright, but the look on his face, the way he shifted uncomfortably, his eyes meeting my husband's, said everything. "I may not have understood everything at first," my father continued, his tone growing steadier, "but it's clear that you two share something real. And for that, I can respect it." He turned to my husband and gave him a nod, a gesture of respect. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The change in his demeanor was subtle, but undeniable. For the first time in years, I saw my father acknowledge me as an adult, as someone who could make her own decisions. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, though I knew this wasn't the resolution I had been hoping for. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't the grand gesture I had dreamed of. But it was something. It was a step. And for now, that was enough. But as my father took his seat, I caught a glimpse of my mother. Her face was a mixture of confusion and reluctant acceptance. She had been quieter than usual throughout the evening, but now I saw the wheels turning in her mind. She was calculating. She was wondering if she, too, had misjudged everything. If her feelings of superiority over my choices had been misplaced. She had always prided herself on being the one who knew what was best for everyone. But now, her daughter was married to a man she had dismissed as beneath her, and that man had just quietly changed the game. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity for her. My mother had lived in her bubble of control for so long, never once questioning the standards she had set for herself and her family. But now, in this moment of truth, she had been confronted with the reality of her own biases. She was faced with the person I had chosen, and no amount of wealth or status could change the fact that she had been wrong. They had all been wrong. The evening continued with the usual wedding festivities, but everything felt different. The usual banter, the music, the laughter, it all seemed distant now. My family had been exposed, their judgment laid bare in front of everyone. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing on me, but I also felt a strange sense of power. My husband's quiet composure was something to behold. He wasn't swayed by their judgment or their sneering remarks. He had done nothing to prove himself, nothing to beg for their approval, and yet there he was, calm, poised, and respected by everyone in the room. As we danced our first dance, I felt him hold me close, the beat of the music almost matching the rhythm of my heart. I leaned in, pressing my cheek against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "You're doing great," he whispered, his voice low enough for only me to hear. "I've got you." And in that moment, I believed him. I believed that we could face anything together. This wasn't just a wedding. This wasn't just a party. This was the beginning of our lives together, and no one, Not even my family could take that away from us. But the night was far from over. As the evening stretched on, the mood in the reception hall began to shift. The laughter from earlier had died down, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that seemed to wrap itself around every conversation. My family sat at their table, now more subdued, their earlier gloating now replaced by a cloud of regret that hung heavy in the air. I could see it in their eyes, the same disbelief they had when they realized who my husband really was. They had underestimated him. They had underestimated me. But it wasn't just about the shock of his wealth, it was about everything they had assumed about our relationship. They had thought me weak for choosing love over wealth, for choosing him despite what they believed he lacked. The more I thought about it, the more I realized just how deeply they had misunderstood me. It wasn't about money, it never had been. It wasn't about status or appearance. It was about the connection we shared, the bond we had built through trust, respect, and, yes, love. The things my family valued most, wealth, power, influence, meant nothing in comparison to the foundation I had with him. And yet, for so many years, I had allowed them to convince me that I needed to fit into their mold. I had allowed their opinions to shape my choices, even though deep down I knew they were wrong. But now, standing at my husband's side, I felt more empowered than I ever had before. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about finding my own truth. And I had finally found it in him. In us. I caught my husband's gaze across the room. He was surrounded by guests, engaging in light conversation, but his eyes never left me. I could feel the love and support emanating from him, a silent promise that no matter what came next, we would face it together. His calmness was contagious. In the past, I would have panicked in this situation, felt like I needed to make everything right for everyone. But now, with him by my side, I realized there was no need for that. This was my moment, my day, and it wasn't going to be overshadowed by anyone else's opinions. As the night wore on, my father stood up again, this time to give a toast to us, the newlyweds. The room grew quiet as he cleared his throat, his earlier discomfort replaced by something that resembled grudging respect. "I've never been one for grand speeches," he began, his voice carrying across the room. "But I've always believed in doing what's best for my family. And when I saw my daughter today, standing beside the man she chose to marry, I realized something important." He paused, his eyes briefly flicking over to my husband. "Sometimes, the best decisions aren't the ones we make based on what others think. Sometimes, they're the ones we make based on what's in our hearts." I watched as my father slowly turned his gaze to me. The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. I've always been proud of my daughter. And today, I'm proud of the man she's chosen. I see now that you two have something real, something lasting. And for that, I offer my congratulations. The room was silent for a beat before a ripple of applause spread through the guests. It wasn't loud or overdone, but it was genuine. My father's acknowledgement, even if not an outright apology, was enough. It was the first time he had publicly admitted that he had been wrong, and for me, that was a small victory. Not for him, but for me. For the woman I had become, the woman who had learned to trust her instincts and her heart over the expectations of others. I looked over at my mother, waiting for her reaction. She had been quiet all night, standing off to the side, watching my father's small but significant shift. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the realization dawning on her that perhaps she, too, had been wrong. She had always prided herself on being the voice of reason, the one who had kept the family together with her meticulous plans and expectations. But tonight, the truth had shattered her world, just as it had shattered my father's. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even disappointment. It was something more complex, regret perhaps, mixed with a sense of loss. Maybe she felt like she had lost control, lost the ability to mold me into the daughter she had wanted me to be. But as her gaze softened, I realized that this was a turning point. She, too, would have to come to terms with the reality that I wasn't the person she had tried to shape. I wasn't sure what would happen next. I didn't know how my relationship with my family would evolve from this point on, but I felt a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time, I wasn't worried about their approval. I wasn't trying to earn their love. I had my own life now. I had my own family, one built on love and respect, not appearances and superficial judgments. The evening drew to a close, and the music played on, but it no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like something deeper, more profound. The tension that had plagued the beginning of the night had slowly faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. My family, once so certain in their judgment of me, had seen the truth. They had seen the man I had chosen to marry, not just his wealth, but the integrity, the kindness, and the quiet strength that had been there all along. As we left the reception, my husband and I walked hand in hand, the cool night air brushing against our skin. I could hear the whispers of the guests behind us, their curiosity about who we were, what we had, lingering in the air. But it didn't bother me anymore. None of it mattered. I had everything I needed right here, with him. We arrived at our new home, a place that had once seemed like a distant dream. Now it was a reality. It was ours, a place where we could build the future we wanted. A place where no one could define us but ourselves. The following days were a whirlwind. News outlets picked up on the story of the mysterious billionaire who had married a woman they considered ordinary. But to us, it wasn't about the attention. It wasn't about the story they wanted to tell. It was about the life we were creating, one filled with love, laughter, and the freedom to live authentically. And my family? They came around. Slowly. It wasn't easy for them to swallow the truth, to admit their mistakes, but they did. My father reached out to me privately, his voice filled with sincerity as he apologized for his earlier words. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was enough. It was a start. For my mother, it would take longer. She had built a life around the idea that she could control everything, that she could shape her family's destiny according to her rules. But I had learned something important from all of this. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had chosen my path, and I was proud of it.